And for those of you who didn't manage to get a copy beforehand, assuming you don't fall asleep during the film, I promise I'll be there afterwards, and I do have a few left. And don't forget, I've got a wife and 3 small children to support, so... the real reason why, I mean, this is such an incredibly emotional experience for me is that this film I made 38 years ago. It has never ever been seen in public for reasons which are quite complicated, and Jako's suggestion, I wrote a long article which is in the booklet, well, very beautiful booklet, I must say. Briefly, for those of you who haven't yet read the booklet, when the film was finished, I was asked to make it both by Leonard and by his then manager, Martin Machat. And it's wonderful for me that Marty sadly is dead, but Marty's son, Steve, is sitting up the back there. He's my fiercest critic. But it's fantastic that he's here. Anyway, when the film was finished, I showed it to Leonard. As I said, it was made at his suggestion. And he didn't sound effects. Thank you. He didn't dislike the film, but he was worried that the film was very confrontational. And I said, very naively, as you know, because I liked him and admired him so much, I said, well, fine, here's all the material, you know, see what you can do. The dates here become quite interesting. It was the tour March to April 1972, and I delivered the film on about the 1st of May. And the BBC, for example, had bought it immediately, and the producer, Steve's father, Marty, would have got most of his money back in one go. What I didn't realise was that there was an assistant editor who told Leonard that he could do a much better job, that I had no idea what I was doing. It's probably true, but I mean, nonetheless. So Leonard was persuaded to have another go at editing the material. The film finally emerged nearly 2 years later, and as far as we can tell, $350,000 later. And the film, when I made it, had cost about £35,000, which I suppose in dollars then would be about $70,000 or $80,000. So huge sums of money were spent re-editing the film, which there are endless bootleg copies, which you've no doubt seen around the place. And I don't know quite what Leonard thought about it, but he refused to promote it. So it opened and closed more or less on the same night in the cinema in London and vanished. Meanwhile, Marty Machat, to whom we referred, came to me and didn't actually apologise, but he was fairly apologetic, and he said, was there any way we could rescue the original film? And I said, well, the trouble is, it's celluloid. Very old celluloid. As somebody I overheard saying when you're coming a good point about this film, it's very old. So, I mean, celluloid in those days, once you started cutting the negative, it was more or less impossible to piece it back together again. So I said, no, I mean, you've destroyed it, effectively, the old film. So it sort of got forgotten. Except it didn't quite get forgotten in my mind, but I couldn't ever find the film, and on the various occasions that I saw Leonard subsequently, always the opening line of the conversation was, where's the film? So I said, Leonard, you tell me where the film is, I have no idea. Cutting this very long story as short as I can, about a year and a half ago, I had to do it, I was very much associated with Led Zeppelin, and particularly with Jimmy Page, and I had to do an interview for an American television program about Led Zeppelin and Jimmy Page. Standing behind the camera during this long and rather turgid interview was a strange-looking chap who, immediately the interview was finished, came over to me and said, you don't recognise me, do you? And I said, no, who are you? And he said, Steve Machat. And I said, well, I could be forgiven for not recognising, because the last time I saw you, I think you were 10. It changed a little since then. And so it was a great deal of, where's the film, where's the film? And he said he was pretty sure he knew where it was. Because, again, it's very complicated how he knew where it was. So I said, for Christ's sake, let's get it out of wherever it is. So we rang, of all people, Frank Zappa's man. It was in a Hollywood, it was in a warehouse in Hollywood. So we rang Frank Zappa's manager, can you believe that? Because I'd done 200 motels with Frank Zappa. We rang Frank Zappa's manager and said, go down now, whatever it costs, get the damn stuff out of there. And so these 2 gigantic pallets, I mean, they would have filled this stage, arrived at my office office in London. And I started to open them, and inside were 294 rusted up cans. I mean, I really was having to hammer them open, to get inside them. And at first I thought, this is never going to work, because these were the original rushes, and for anybody who knows about making films, this is basically the raw material which had been cut and chopped to bits. So I thought, well, this is a wonderful moment in my life, but it's not going to work. And then one extremely rainy Saturday, I wanted to move these. They were all in boxes, the boxes were everywhere, and they were getting in the way. So I wanted to reorganize them and sort of put them somewhere. So I started to move the boxes, and I just opened one box, just curious really to see what was inside that box. And there were the original soundtracks, my original soundtracks for making the original version of the film. And I knew they were mine because there were what we call dubbing charts with all my notes on. So I'm looking at this and Christ. So we all cleaned them all up as best we could, took them down to our digital sound studio and produced the soundtrack which you're about to hear, which I would be astonished if you don't think is a really wonderful, wonderful soundtrack. So now I have this. See me afterwards if you don't think it is. Anyway, so now we have the soundtrack, but we still have no film. So now I think, right, I've got to have a go at this. So I systematically then went through all these 294 cans, and I found, oh, that little bit of film, I remember that. So it's now like a gigantic jigsaw puzzle. So it's all been processed digitally now. So I've got soundtrack, and I find this bit of film, oh yes, that goes there. And I find this bit of film, oh, that goes there. And eventually, the film that you're about to see, the pictures that you're about to see, is made up of just under, I'm not exaggerating this, believe me, Steve will tell you I'm telling the truth, just under 3,000 little fragments, which I have pieced and stitched together digitally. Most of the I think 99% of the time you won't be aware of that, but that was how this thing was finally rescued. And now we have television companies queuing up right round the block and from here to Warsaw wanting to show it. And the film actually is released on the DVD that you saw out there on September the 1st. And because Jaco was so incredibly helpful when we were trying to sort of sort out, this bit went and that bit went, we said we'd bring it here. So this is the film that I made in 1972. And it really is the first time it's ever been shown in public. We've already had 3 or 4 reviews, which are embarrassing. Just embarrassing. I wrote to one chap and said, "Now come on, calm down. I know it's all right, but it's not that good." So, but anyway, this is the first time, and in front of an audience of experts, I'm slightly worried about that. So, having said I'll be there afterwards, I'm not too sure. I'll wait for 10 minutes and see how it goes, and I might scarf up quick. Anyway, I hope you enjoy it. It's a very complicated film, as you will see. Those of you who've got used to the bootlegs, I'm afraid you're in for a quite nasty surprise, because the bootlegs are mostly of version. Am I that bad? Is it that low? It's a bit loud down there. You sure you want to? You're going to. Okay. The film is as close as I could get it from the material that I had to the original version. And for those of you who've got used to the very bad bootlegs, you'll recognise some of it, but there's some you won't recognise because it's quite different. And today, as you know, is not only the Polish president being installed, but it's also Hiroshima Day. And one of the things that I remember incredibly clearly when I had my very first meeting with Leonard in Steve's father's office in October 1971, I arrived with my copy of the book of poems, Energy of Slaves. And Leonard was astonished by this, and he said, "Oh, you know my poems." Of course I know your poems. It was the poems that I first got to know, long before I got to know the songs. And he said, "It's a condition of me doing the film that you include the poems." Not a problem. So we included the poems. Now, for those of you who've also got The Energy of Slaves and read it, you'll be aware that a great number of the poems have a very, very powerful political meaning, a very, very powerful political aspect. And one of the things that I remember we tried to do when we did the film, and I hope you'll see it this afternoon, is to say, Leonard is extraordinary man, great singer, and this is only really could sing, great singer, great songwriter, etc., etc., etc. But he's telling us something with these poems. These are not just whimsy. There's something far more substantial. You know that. You're an audience that's committed to Leonard Cohen. But on Hiroshima Day, just remember that when you watch this film. Anyway, hope you enjoy it. Thank you very much.